A big hello and a very warm welcome to Brand Equity with me, Sonali Krishna. Today, I'm going to be in conversation with an extremely interesting man. He's Rob Norman, the Chief Digital Officer of GroupM, but more importantly, one of the top 10 influencers of media and marketing in the world. Rob Norman, truly a pleasure having you at the Brand Equity Studio.
Well, thank you. And you'll surprise many people by that statement of my influence, but it was a poll and the numbers apparently were legitimate, so I'll take it.
Yeah, number 8, Rob Norman, I think that's quite an achievement. What would you have to say to viewers in India and marketers and other members of the advertising and media fraternity who are watching this show? If they want to be one of the top influencers in the country, what would you say would be the 3 bullet points to become an influencer of sorts?
Think before you write. Try and frame whole ideas. Try and give a sense of which direction you believe the issue should go in over time. Understand the stakeholders as well as you can and be prepared to take any criticism. But also remember that the piece of self-confidence that you need is to make one big assumption. And the big assumption is that your readers are the most intelligent people you can imagine, but some of your commenters are terribly dumb people and you should ignore them.
Fair enough. So, Rob, if I could flash back in time, and not that back in time, but just to 2015, and ask you, what do you think the top 3 disruptors have been, what would you say?
So the biggest disruption, if you're a digital marketer of 2015, was the whole issue of the supply chain integrity of digital media. Was the impression fraudulent? Was it blocked by an ad blocker? Was it viewable by the consumer? What were you actually paying for? The other big disruptor has been the really significant rise of activist investors in major corporations and their desire to extract more value for shareholders, and the way that has changed the focus of corporate management. And you've heard the expression zero-based budgeting and the importance of 3G, the Brazilian investment firm that controls Kraft Heinz and controls Anheuser-Busch and others, and the attitude now taken towards budgeting has really driven the accountability agenda in our business enormously. So those have been the 2 things that have really changed the focus of the business. More broadly about the disruptors, I think the last 2 years has been the continued consolidation of the power of Facebook and Google on a global basis. But the big disruptor that we all want to happen is the truly wide and affordable deployment of significant bandwidth to populations around the world. And we're hugely optimistic about the 4G deployment in India. I wish I was as certain as I am optimistic. And if I speak the truth, I would say that the progress of even 3G deployment, just as a user, just walking around with a device in my pocket since the last time I was expressing my confidence in this, hasn't moved as far as I would have liked it to do.
That's amazing. I share your sentiment as a user as well.
But I think there's a greater good to be achieved.
But just to take you back to another burning topic, until a few weeks ago in India, that had consumed at least social media, if not the entire country, was the Facebook Free Basics plan. And I really want your view on what you thought of that, and did you think the reaction was warranted, or did we jump the gun in terms of our reaction and we overreacted?
Well, I think that Facebook went into it well-intentioned, but there was a consequence of what they were going to do that would give Facebook a commercial advantage in the market, which would have, to an extent, disadvantaged local publishers and others, and disadvantaged one telco against another. And I suspect that whilst the overriding intention was to create something that's much better than nothing solution to people that would otherwise have nothing, is a really good one. But I think that the unintended consequence of it was an unacceptable one, particularly in India. And the net neutrality rules here suggested that the Facebook strategy wasn't appropriate, and I think it needed a consortium approach in which it was done with all of the carriers together and opened up many more services to people than just Facebook. So I believe actually the Indian government and the regulator here made a reasonable decision. I don't think it was a good decision for everybody, but on the balance of it, it was probably a reasonable decision.
I want to talk about what Martin Sorrell often states, and he says that, that Google is our frenemy. I'm sure there was enough and more reason that was strategic to WPP and GroupM for buying out, its digital media buying agency, which is
Essence, yeah.
Essence Digital. So give me a sense of why Essence Digital was actually acquired and how that will actually work very strategically for GroupM.
Well, so I think the frenemy thing has been a bit overplayed, frankly. We're nervous about clients being completely reliant on a tech stack and a data stack that's owned by someone that also sells media inventory. We see that as being potentially troublesome, but we don't think Google are bad people. And they've been our biggest media partner since the middle of 2014, and it's a $4 billion relationship between Google and WPP. So clearly we're more friend than enemy. As Martin would now say, they're a friendlier frenemy than they were. And eventually some words need to be put to bed. So why did we buy Essence? Well, I think the first reason why we bought Essence is that we think they do an exceptional job. If someone says to you, what's the calling card of your business? And the answer to the question is, we buy all the digital media for Google. You're likely to say, oh, you must be quite good at it then. And they are. They're really, really good at it. And we bought them not so they could become more like GroupM. We bought them so GroupM could become more like them.
Okay, I got Essence.
Yes.
So let me move on to Google, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. All of these platforms and your view on how its social importance, growing or declining as the case might be.
Well, you're talking about some of the most remarkable stories in modern business.
I am.
Google changed the world. When you become a verb, then you've achieved something. To Google, something has become important. And I think their original mission to gather the world's information and make it freely available was a kind of an astonishingly high-minded thing to do. I think Facebook's mission to connect the world and the people in the world is extraordinary. I think LinkedIn's mission to create the economic graph of the world by connecting professionals with businesses, with educational establishments, these are all extraordinary things. Twitter's mission to become the world's town hall live and in real time is amazing. I'm not sure Snapchat's mission is quite so high-minded as that, and I've never heard it quite described. But these platforms are immense. But what none of them can do is stand still. So Facebook didn't stand still because it realized that photographs were a key part of the social sharing experience. So they bought Instagram. They didn't stand still at all when they realized that messaging was a key part of people's interaction. So they bought WhatsApp and they built Messenger on the same side of it. Twitter, which is a product that I use enormously and enjoy enormously, is a different kind of behavior and isn't a utility in people's lives. It's very difficult to go off Facebook because once all your friends are there, disappearing from it sort of means disappearing from them. It's very difficult to take yourself off Google because it's an astonishingly good product. Maps is fantastic, the search product is fantastic. If you happen to like short form video and you decide never to look at YouTube, then you're cutting yourself off from a considerable part of that world. And I don't think Twitter has become a utility in quite the same way. And I think that Snapchat has become a utility for some people, but whether it's a durable utility or not, I don't know. Sure. And the big test for Snapchat is going to be the balance between Snapchat as a social and communication platform and Snapchat as a content platform with Snapchat Discover and so forth. Because the fundamentals of Snapchat are about communication, and it's being amended to being a content distribution platform. Facebook are doing it with instant articles, and I think they're going to be successful, and the reason they're going to be successful is they've got so much data that can move so quickly that their monetization of content for publishers is going to be as good, if not better, than publishers could monetize it on its own account. They have become businesses of enormous social significance, and with that becomes enormous social responsibility. And it's very interesting to me about how they go about judging that, because had it been in any other category, in telecoms, in energy, in transportation, you can be sure that they would be regulated businesses by now, and they're not. And I'm not saying they should be. In fact, I don't think they should be, but I think their bar they set for themselves in self-regulation needs to be incredibly high, and also their desire to create policy, because it's a tricky situation when a commercial enterprise creates policy that affects enormous sectors of the population. So I think that all of those companies have got to be very circumspect. But you would bet long on Google, you would bet long on Facebook. It's going to be fascinating to see which, if any, of the Google moonshots hit escape velocity and then change the dependency of Google's business on advertising as a revenue source. Because it's important to remember, and this is why the advertiser's voice is so important in all of this, is that almost 100% of the revenue of Google and Facebook comes from advertisers.
But I mean, so you've explained to me the growing social importance. Now, if you could put that in perspective and juxtapose it with, you know, how advertisers and advertising is actually being consumed on this increasingly important social, you know, socially relevant platforms.
I think that the world of data is speeding up. I think that the mechanisms for attributing advertising effect are in the process of becoming better than they have been, driven by the availability of data and processing. And I think there's going to be a lot of work done over the next year or 18 months by companies like WPP on behalf of our clients to look at much faster and more accurate attribution models to look at advertising effect. I think that we live in an interesting world where everyone's assumption is that somehow marketing was a faith-based activity, and that somehow because of the arrival of digital it's become a fact-based activity. Well, I'm kind of prepared to believe in a balance of faith and fact, but I'd like to get the balance right.
Tell me, doesn't it bother you that all these social giants, be it Google, be it YouTube, be it Facebook, be it Twitter, all of them have their own analytics, right? So you're essentially dependent on their analytics. So they're the platform and they're giving you the analytics. How is this all right by a large conglomerate such as yourselves? And how is this okay for large advertisers who are investing millions of dollars with these platforms?
Well, I think you make an assumption that just because they say X is Y and here are our analytics, we just lap it up and say, oh, well, in that case, you said it, so it must be true, and that's the beginning and the end of the story. And whilst I'm in no way pointing fingers at someone, if you go and look at studies done by any of these companies, it's not just them, it's many others, what they'll do is they'll say X or Y spent X dollars with us and they got a 3.7 times return on investment. And here's the fun part. Every single one of them will say the same thing. And then the advertiser will look and say, well, hang on a second. If I'm getting this much return on investment, why am I saying the same amount of stuff as I did last year? Sure. Something's got to be wrong with the calculus. When we do allocation models, we don't blindly allocate to those people that say ROI is unimpeachable. Because if we did, then what we would do is you would start and say, I'm going to spend every single dollar on Google search until that dollar is more expensive than the first dollar I'm going to spend on Facebook. Then I'm going to spend it all on Facebook, and you would end up with this kind of interesting polygraph-like line or heart monitor. Sorry, when I say polygraph-like line, it would imply someone was lying, but let's call it a heart monitor instead effect. And we don't do that, and we never have done that, but we've never ever planned on the basis of single channel attribution.
You know, but as the Chief Digital Officer of GroupM, I want to ask you whether it's possible today to build a brand only on digital assets.
I certainly think it would be very, very difficult to do a YouTube and Facebook only strategy that went from a brand that nobody had ever heard of to a global powerhouse. I think that would be hard. I think also that it's interesting to observe that some of the narrative of the power of social media and so on is kind of interestingly analogous with what's going on in the election cycle at the moment in the US. Because if you talk to anyone about the election of 2008 or 2012, it all would have been about Obama's social media strategy. Sure. I mean, for everyone in marketing, you know, every time you went to a conference, someone would be doing, what does the election campaign and Obama's social media campaign tell you about marketing? And my answer to that was, well, not very much unless your brand is important to your customer as the future of your country is. I was being slightly ironic, but you know what I mean. But Donald Trump has got where he's got by being famous, simply by being famous. And as Jeremy Bullmore, the longtime creative director of WPP, of JWT, famously said years ago, if you want to be as famous as Madonna, everyone has to know who you are. And it's very difficult to use just platforms like Facebook or just platforms like Google and get to a state where everyone knows who you are. You know, if you ask Sir Martin about this, he would say on the balance of probability, he thinks that quote-unquote old media is undervalued by advertisers now relative to new media, and that he thinks that its impact is still incredibly important for brand building. And, you know, on the balance,
you would agree with that?
Well, he pays my salary, so of course I agree with it. What a ridiculous question.
I want to ask you about discovery. And do you think discovery on digital is becoming harder and harder than it was, let's say, a couple of years ago, which is why you saw a lot of videos going viral as opposed to you see them today, because of, you know, the fact that Facebook looks at YouTube as their enemy. I think Twitter soon will also look at Facebook and YouTube as their enemy. And so the shareability, because every time you post, let's say, a YouTube link on Facebook, the algorithm will ensure it doesn't come on your news feed. And so, and you know, YouTube is not essentially the best place for discovery. So how do you think that entire, you know, dynamics is going to play out?
Are you a journalist or a conspiracy theorist?
Both.
Both, okay. So I think the person you should really interview about this is Jonah Peretti. And Jonah is the founder of BuzzFeed, as you know. And Jonah's ninja skill and his great acceptance of what goes on in the world was when he realized that the way that information cascades is different on a platform by platform basis, and different qualities of content, not quality as in it's really good, it's not really good, but characteristics, I should have said, of content determine the place it's most likely to start if it's then going to explode and go viral. I don't believe that we're near the end of virality at all. I don't believe that we're near the end of discovery at all. I think what we have got is a supply-side glut of content, and that supply-side glut of content combined with an increasingly atomized audience. And so what happens is it rather depends on the relative influence of the people in your network. So is it harder for something to bubble up from absolutely nothing? Maybe yes. But it depends on who it is that's doing that first stage of the discovery and how few links there are in the chain between it and people like you, or it and CNN, or it and Kanye West, or whoever it might happen to be. I've put you in interesting company.
Thank
you have so to
much.
admit.
You are so kind. I want to talk to you about, you know, broadly how YouTube and the advertising there is working, and I really want to talk about pre-roll, and then I want to talk to you about how we do YouTube in India. So that I'll come to later. But I mean, what do you think of pre-roll?
Well, I've long been of the view, I mean, I think TrueView is a great idea, by the way. I wish the TrueView product was a 10-second product, not a 30-second product, and I've said that to the people at Google. It's my view that the value exchange between the consumer is, if you have to search around to X out a commercial to stop it running, and you can get rid of it after 4 seconds, I don't think that's much difference between that and actually watching it calmly for 10 seconds, honestly. Really? And no, I think the effort between the 4 seconds and 10 seconds is minimal. Yeah. But my central point is this, and I think it's a creative one. I think that advertisers have it's interesting how the 30-second commercial is just in the vernacular. When people talk about advertising and they talk about the change today, it's the end of the 30-second commercial. Or we have to think beyond the 30-second commercial, and they use the 30-second commercial as the kind of it's like it's the gold standard somehow, the fixed unit of currency. And my view is that the big focus going forward should be the 10-second commercial. And the reason is this. What's clear to me is that consumers are consuming content in smaller and smaller fragments. And so there's a rate of exchange between the tolerable amount of advertising, the amount of content you consume, which means that to consume a 30-second commercial in front of 2 minutes of content isn't going to work, and is actually going to be a negative experience. I also think that if you focus on making the 10-second commercial with integrity in its own right, as opposed to a cut down from a 30-second commercial, which is what most 10 seconds are, what you get is something that works really hard from the beginning. And if it works really hard from the beginning, it's going to work with a 3-second autoplay on Facebook. It might work in vertical video on Snapchat or in Twitter as well.
So, you know, I'm so glad you brought about this 10-second commercial for, let's say, YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. And I agree with you. I don't think anybody articulated that so well as you have. However, in India, right, a lot of stuff which we tag as digital, right, is 7 or 8 or now 10-minute long ads, right, because, you know, space is free, exactly. and they play it on digital, and they call it's a YouTube ad, and that's what we practice as create digital advertising. I think it's quite a joke. So I think it's ironic that you say that we have to move from 30 seconds to 10 seconds, while in India, or maybe even, you know, other parts of the world, we're just getting into really indulgent long-form advertising that people think will work just because you're not paying for it.
Well, you are paying for it mostly because you know, if you actually look at the real view counts of long-form commercials that are organic, they're actually pretty small. And I do believe there was a view that was prevalent in the West in the relatively early days of digital video that suddenly, if the cost of distribution was disconnected from the duration of the movie, so hang on, it costs the same, i.e. nothing, to run 5 minutes as it does 30 seconds, then knock yourself out. You know, I mean, if you want to do that, do that. But if I had the choice of only making long form or only making 10s, there's no doubt in my mind that I'd only make 10s, if that was the only choice.
Last question, and I want to go back to 2015 here, and I want to then bring it to 2016 and the impact you're seeing. The whole breakdown of trust, you know, because of the whole kickback storm, thanks to the former Mediacom CEO. While, you know, much has been said about it by different executives of WPP and GroupM, I want to know, are clients convinced? Do you see the breakdown of trust is still quite big, or do you think
are they convinced of what?
Are they convinced that, you know, there is actually no ad fraud going on?
Well, there's an active investigation going on. We're expecting the Association of National Advertisers investigation to come up with whatever it comes up with, I think in May of this year, most likely. I think that, you know, I'm a perennial optimist. I think what you'll find is a system that is structurally pretty sound. I suspect there's some bad apple behavior in the system rather than systemic behavior in the system. I think if one or more agencies is discovered to be behaving badly systemically, then that's not going to be good for that agency, and to a degree it won't be good for the industry either. We've been unbelievably clear at WPP on what our position is in the US from the very beginning of this, to the point that the original article in Advertising Age was re-edited within an hour of publication with our response to it. And I think we've been straightforward. I think we've also, you know, we won the L'Oreal business in the US just before Christmas. And L'Oreal is arguably the most demanding client on that front. And L'Oreal and GroupM have written a contract that both parties have signed, which clearly convinces L'Oreal that it gives them sufficient rights in all the situations that might occur. I do genuinely believe that it's a matter of contracts between agencies and clients. I do genuinely believe that both agencies and clients have the responsibility to comply with those contracts, and if they don't, bear the consequences of non-compliance. But any two business parties could enter into any contract, and people have said to me, well, that's okay, they said, but the contracts are so complicated. And I think about it, and I think about GroupM as an enterprise, and I think about a Unilever or a L'Oreal, and these are big, well-capitalized, well-funded companies that if anyone thinks they're not capable of writing a contract that gives them a level of compliance that they need to make them happy, well, it's kind of ridiculous as a notion. I also think that the structure of media markets is completely different around the world. Everyone knows that there are rebates in certain markets, but everyone knows that the client contracts are written to deal with who gets what share of the rebates, and they're in the contracts. And so I think it's a corporate matter between corporations. But I do absolutely believe that if there's evidence of systemic abuse of the system, that's going to be difficult. And we'll wait and see. We've made some very bold and straightforward statements in this area. We stand by them. It's been certainly, some ink in the water, certainly for the last 6 or 9 months. I'm not sure whether we're going to come out in a better place or not. But we'll see. I can't prejudge an investigation.
On that note, Rob, thank you so much for joining us right here at the Brand Equity Studio in Mumbai. This has been truly marvelous and truly a pleasure speaking with you on everything digital.
And a pleasure for me too. Thank you.